Welcome to the morning devotional. My name's Mark, and I'm going to be talking through 1 Timothy 5, verses 1 to 16, and I'm going to be reading from the ESV version, and I'm going to turn my phone off before it annoys anybody. There we go. So, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some returns to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hopes on God and continues in supplications and prayer night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works. If she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for abandoning their former faith. Beside that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have young widows marry, bear children, manage their household, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so they may care for those who are truly widows. Wow, some interesting viewpoints there, and I'm going to try my best to talk to them. I don't fully understand all of them, so I'll try as best I can. So today's passage could be entitled, How to Treat People in the Church. As a brief reminder, Paul is writing to Timothy. At this point, he's a young pastor and he's leading a church. And so Paul is writing this letter to give him advice about church governance. And in this passage, Paul's focus concerns dealing with different groups of people in the church. The first two verses suggest it is better to encourage people than to scold or admonish them. This is especially the case with older church members who are either wise and knowledgeable and might consider advice unnecessary, or they're simply set in their ways and would disregard comments, however well intended. We probably all know a number of people who could fall into these characterizations. Note the suggestion of treating them like parents is important, as in the Ten Commandments. God tells us to honor our father and mother. As for younger people, to treat them like brothers or sisters. Now, we're all members of God's family, and we should relate to each other as such, showing each other love and mutual respect. And that is likely to have a greater influence over everyone than strong words of rebuke. Now, that's not to say that elders should refrain from rebuking members who misbehave themselves or work in manners which are ungodly. But I think we all know that we're better to be encouraged than we are to have somebody take us aside and essentially give us a telling off. Now, the remaining verses focus on widows, and there are some observations being made, of which I have to admit that I don't fully understand, so please bear with me. There is a distinction that is being drawn here between older and younger widows, and Paul introduces this notion of the true widow. And Paul is generally setting out principles of helping the needy who are truly in need. We need to remember in these days of when the New Testament was written, there was no social care system. In that day, there was one especially vulnerable class of people, and that was the elderly widow, who were usually without support from husbands or grown-up children, and without means to adequately support themselves. In such case, the church should step in and directly assist the widow. Now, widows with grown-up families and close relationships should be supported by their family. In the first instance, it's really their duty to take care of their birth mother, who has brought them up and invested a lot of time in them, and that makes quite a lot of sense. And we need to remember at this time, families were highly cohesive units, often with many generations living together in a single household. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever, is what I'll refer to in there. So even non-believers at that time would help their relatives. So if people of the church are not helping their own family, that's a pretty significant indictment upon them and their behaviour. So the general principle that's being revealed here are extremely relevant today, where people should be able to look to local congregations as a place where poor and needy can seek help, financial support. That's not to say that churches should not be careful so as to not be taken advantage of by those who you might describe as idlers or freeloaders. The church should support the truly destitute who are godly. God's normal way of providing for the needy is not through the local church, but through our own hard work. We've often heard the saying, God helps those who help themselves. Now, although as far as I can determine, this is not a Bible verse, but there is a significant semblance of truth in this adage. Now, at this point, I'd like to give thanks to God for provisions in my life. After many months of not working, I was informed yesterday that I'd been offered a new job. And I want to thank everybody who's been praying for me and for others in this similar situation. And in this case, God's provision has surpassed my expectations. Back to widows. Those who were over 60 should be accepted into the support of the church, but only true widows, i.e. having no immediate family to support them, but they must also have a godly character. They've raised their own families in the way of God and therefore should be supported by the church. Now, as for younger widows, Paul is suggesting that they are likely to remarry and as such will receive support from their new families. This is why there's some difficulties in interpretation. It sounded like Paul was condemning young widows' desire for romantic companionship, but he insisted that it be pursued and expressed in purity that should mark all believers. I was somewhat concerned about his description of idlers going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies. I have to admit, I'm not really clear on the details of where he's going into here, and he seemed to be rebuking the behaviour, except to say that maybe such behaviour was common in times, and he's highlighting that this kind of behaviour should not be tolerated in terms of widows living an indulgent lifestyle. I can only infer that he was saying people with lots of time on their hands can behave in ungodly ways, and I think we should all consider whether our activities are wholesome. And finally, I want to leave you with something to consider. How well do you think you're treating others in God's kingdom? And that's all that I have to say on this particular passage.